Order. Irene Campbell to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered E-petition 736578 relating to animal testing. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mr Twigg. I would like to start by declaring an interest as the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on phasing out animal experiments in medical research, supported by the Secretariat Animal Free Research. I am a long campaigner in this area, as well as many other topics relating to animal welfare, and it is important to me and many others that animals are replaced in research as soon as possible. The petition, created by Maria Iriart from Camp Beagle, is named End Testing on Dogs and Other Animals for Development of Products for Human Use. And it goes on to say, many tests on dogs and other animals cause unimaginable suffering. They can translate poorly into effective treatments and cures for human diseases, or provide safety and efficacy data that is not relevant to humans. Over 90% of drugs that appear safe and effective in animals do not go on to receive FDA USA approval. In 2023, 2,605,528 animals were used for the first time in scientific procedures, including 2,477 dogs and 1,815 primates. Animals are bred and housed in bleak conditions and then used in tests that can cause immense physical and psychological suffering. We think government-led action is required to radically divert funding and evolve policy to implement the use of existing and the development of new non-animal methodologies, or NAMS. We believe the current testing paradigm is failing both animals and humans and is actually holding back medical advances. This petition has collected almost 121,000 signatures, which is a great achievement, and it's good to see Maria in the gallery today. 121 of those signatures were from my own constituency of North Ayrshire and Arran. I know this is a topic many people care deeply about, and I have received many emails from constituents as well as from members of the public living in other constituencies. In the past week, many of these have referenced the exposés in the Mail on Sunday and Daily Mirror, which showed incredibly disturbing footage of what's going on in UK laboratories. In particular, there were shocking images of long-tailed macaques being force-fed new weight loss drugs, suffering from extreme distress. It's horrible to think of the pain and torture that innocent animals have to be put through so that humans can be helped to lose weight. It is also important to note that these images that are being circulated are from laboratory sites which are regulated and operating within the law. There are more experiments I'd like to talk about in greater detail. For example, testing of anti-inflammation drugs on beagles and skin treatments on pigs. However, the content is so incredibly distressing that I feel it is too disturbing to share during this debate.
Will the honourable member give way?
I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. We are a nation of animal lovers. My very first Westminster Hall debate was on animal welfare, and as a constituent pointed out to me, if we loved animals so much, we wouldn't need to have an animal welfare strategy. Whilst I welcome the government's animal welfare strategy, and I welcome the move towards ending testing on animals, does she agree with me that the fact that we even use beagles because they are placid is utterly heartbreaking? And does she also agree with me that any move that we can do to encourage to expedite the end of animal testing would be a welcome one to many of our constituents?
Irene Campbell.
I thank my honourable friend for her intervention, and I can say that I absolutely agree with both points raised, and I think it is important that this topic is that this issue is dealt with sooner rather than later. I will say a bit more about that. Yes, I will give way.
The Honourable Lady is making an excellent speech, making the points very, very clearly. Like many members, I've had hundreds of emails about today's debate encouraging me to take part, particular concerns about the use of dogs. But does she support the calls for Herby's law to stop animal testing by 2035?
I thank the honourable member for raising that point. I absolutely support Herby's law, and as I mentioned earlier, the APPG is supported by Animal Free Research, who are hoping to implement Herby's law. So 100% I agree with what the honourable member has said. Another extremely cruel test is the forced swim test, which still has 3 licences granted to last until 2028 in the UK. The government's Replacing Animals in Science strategy addresses this test specifically, stating, "The test has limited scientific validity, particularly its translational relevance to human mental health disorders." Animal behaviour in the forced swim test also lacks information on treatment latency and varies across strains and protocols. Therefore, we would expect the Home Office regulator's default position to be that the FST does not pass the harm benefit test required under the Animal Scientific Procedures Act. It would make complete sense to me and to many others that these licences should be cancelled immediately. I will give way.
Steve Rice.
And commend the petition signatories for bringing this to us today. I also want to commend my honourable friend for all of her work, hard work and advocacy on this area, and I've been in many debates with her over the last 2 years. Does she agree with me that the government strategy to phase out animals in medical research is a very good thing, but it is a step in the right direction on the journey that we want to get to phase out completely the use of animals in medical experimentation? And would she also join me in encouraging members in the new session to take forward Herby's law as a private member's bill, as I have over the last 2 years? Thank you.
Irene Campbell.
My honourable friend for his very kind comments. I fully, as I said, I absolutely 100% support the implementation of Herby's law sooner rather than later. I do welcome the strategy, and I will say more about that further on in this debate. So, a year ago tomorrow, I led a very similar petitions debate titled "Ban Immediately the Use of Dogs in Scientific and Regulatory Procedures," which was also created by Maria Iriart. It is clear to me and many others that the public, as well as parliamentarians, are clearly not letting this issue go. And in that debate, and in others since, I referenced a debate from the other place from 1927. Yes, I will give way.
I thank the honourable member for making a very good speech, and I'm grateful to her, as is the whole committee. She talks about a change, or refers to a change. I want the honourable member to agree with me that it is fascinating. We all care about this matter hugely, but I find in the emails I've been getting that increasingly the younger generation is not willing to tolerate this at all, and I would welcome that. I see that personally as a very good shift in society.
Irene Campbell.
I thank the honourable member for his comments, and I fully agree with what's being said, and I think it is really important that younger people really take this forward. Earlier today, I met a young woman who's 10 when I went out to speak to the representatives from Camp Beagle, and she was really, really keen that we get this moved, and I thought that was great. So in the debate, and in others since, I referenced a debate from the other place from 1927 on the Protection of Dogs Bill. In this debate, the surgeon Sir Lambert Ormsby was quoted as saying, "Experiments on dogs may now be discontinued. All that can be found out by physiological experiments for application to human beings has long since been discovered, and repetitions are unnecessary and cruel." I think it's really sad that nearly 100 years later, dogs continue to be used in this cruel and outdated way. I will give way to... You choose. I'll give way.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and for securing this debate. This is a huge issue for my constituency in North Down, and would she agree that, given the grave ethical concern that animals used in testing endure immense pain, distress and confinement, and that the scientific validity of such testing and increasing is actually in doubt? Is it not time that we prioritise human alternatives and invest in advanced technology to replace animal testing?
Irene Campbell.
I thank the honourable member for his comments, and I absolutely agree with everything that was said, and I will say a bit more about that later on. Yes.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and thank you for her passion, and thanks for her passionate speech. My constituents in Stratford-on-Avon are proud of the UK's reputation for high animal welfare standards, but they struggle to square that with the continuous scale of animal testing and lack of pace on change, and as she highlighted, nearly for 100 years now. Does the honourable member agree that the real question now is not whether we can move away from animal testing, but how quickly we are prepared to do so?
I thank the honourable member for her comments, and I fully agree with everything that's been said, and I will go on to say a little bit more about that. Today's petition specifically refers to dogs, as well as other animals that are used in testing, In fact, 2.64 million procedures in British laboratories in 2024 used animals, and every minute of every day, 5 animals are used in research in the United Kingdom. Over 16,000 experiments were carried out on specially protected species, including cats, dogs, horses and monkeys. 1,651 dogs were used in experiments in 2024. I will give way.
The Honourable Member for giving way. She's been very generous with her time. Just on dogs, they do have noticeable physiological differences to humans, different enzymes, different gastric pH, which leads to the vast majority of drugs that are tested on dogs failing to translate to humans. Therefore, does my honourable friend agree that the government should commit to ending the use of dogs specifically in testing for human use and provide greater funding for alternatives such as organs on chips, which we're seeing coming through?
Irene Campbell.
I thank the honourable member for the points she raises. I agree wholeheartedly with everything that's been said, and I will speak a bit more about organ on a chip and how we need to move faster towards phasing out animals in research. But I do think there is an opportunity to phase dogs out, almost immediately, really. So I'll continue. It is also important to note that figures released in the annual reports from the Home Office only covers animals protected by the Animal Scientific Procedures Act of 1986, and that individual animals can be used many times in different tests. However, the statistics only count the first time an animal is used in an experiment. The real number of experiments every year is likely much higher, as this data is not captured. We know that UK law already recognises that animals have feelings. In 2022, the Animal Sentience Bill was approved by Parliament, formally recognising what we all know, that animals have emotions and feelings. The suffering caused to these animals is a clear ethical problem. The effectiveness of these experiments also calls into question the need for the obvious suffering, torture and painful death that many of these animals endure. Over 92% of drugs fail in human clinical trials, and after passing the animal trials, this increases to a 99.6 failure rate in Alzheimer's disease drugs. To quote Animal Free Research UK, animals like monkeys don't naturally develop Alzheimer's or live long enough to study ageing in the same way that humans experience it. So these outdated methods are simply not giving us the answers we need.
Well, give way.
I'll give way and then I'll
Dixon.
give way.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way for her great speech, her great work in this area. And I'd also like to thank all those residents in Dartford in my constituency who have signed this petition. I was really pleased to see the government's announcement of a long-term roadmap to reduce and phase out animal testing and scientific research, with key milestones for the abolition of specific tests, as she's saying, the end of skin, eye irritation and skin sensitisation testing on animals this year. Would she agree with me, though, that we should try to speed up this timetable as far as we possibly can so that we can end animal testing at the soonest opportunity?
I thank my honourable friend for his comments. I agree with everything that has been said, and I will go on to say a bit more about that. Yes.
I thank her very much for giving way. She is making a very powerful point. I think it is sometimes presented that there is a conflict here between our very understandable concerns around animal welfare and good science, but as she set out, that is actually not the case. And I think the really heartbreaking, frustrating thing is that we know that in many cases where these experiments are ongoing and animals are suffering as a result, it is far less rigorous than some of the alternatives we already know work better but aren't yet regulated in the same way. So would she agree that the roadmap the government has set out sets the firing gun to make sure we have these regulated alternatives in place as quickly as possible? And would she join with me in urging the government to move as fast as possible so we can get better, robust science and protect animals? It's an and, not an or or an either.
Irene Campbell.
I thank my honourable friend for his comments, and I agree with everything that has been said. I'll speak about some of this later on, but also I have on occasions met with the relevant minister, and we're due to have a meeting soon. At one meeting I did specifically ask that we remove dogs immediately from medical testing. I have to be honest and say I was slightly disappointed, or very disappointed by the answer, but I think that we need to keep up the momentum on these very serious issues. There are alternatives to animal research, known as new approach methodologies, or NAMs, which are constantly being researched and developed. For example, any members here who attended last year's Lush Cosmetics event would have seen their soaps depicting organ-on-a-chip technology. These are plastic chips which can mimic human organs and tissues for experimentation. AI is another great and exciting opportunity for replacing animal testing. A software called Animal GAN was developed by the US Food and Drug Administration and aims to accurately determine how rats would react to chemicals without the need to do new rat tests. I will give way.
John?
I thank the honourable member for giving way. She's giving an excellent speech. On cosmetics, does she share my concern around the continued use of Botox in the non-surgical aesthetic treatment industry? And Botox occupies, I think, perhaps not a unique position, but it occupies a position in this sphere where it's a product used for medical purposes, and animal testing is therefore allowed because it falls under the medical definition, but Botox is increasingly being used in the cosmetics sphere. I fear that this is a loophole that needs to be addressed, and for the record, I'm wholly opposed to animal testing in all of its forms and believe it should be phased out across the board to the absolute maximum extent possible.
I thank the honourable member for that really important point that has just been raised. It's not an area that I had considered before, but I absolutely agree, because any of us in this room could go on an afternoon course and tomorrow be injecting people with Botox. So I do think that's a very valid point. Similarly, Virtual Second Series has created an AI-powered virtual dog which is trained on historic dog tests. From an economics perspective, it is worth thinking about how much we could save by transitioning from animals to AI. I would ask, what is the price of us not moving to more contemporary scientific methods? It's not only kinder, but smarter. Recent research and analysis commissioned by Lush Cosmetics, undertaken by Common Sense Policy and Northumbria University, shows how much growth potential this sector has. Between 2021 and 2024, the UK's non-animal methods sector grew rapidly, with turnover rising to over 1.2 billion and employment increasing year on year.
Yes. I thank my honourable friend for giving way and giving way quite generously in this debate and for leading it so excellently. I've been contacted, like many members, by constituents raising this issue, and on Friday met with one of my constituents, Karen, who was talking to me at my coffee morning specifically about this issue of new approach methodologies and their potential to unlock a much more humane approach in testing of new medicines. I think the honourable member is rightly putting forward the potential of AI to model biological processes. And doesn't she agree that the UK is a leader of both life sciences, but also in AI? So it should be the case that with focus, with joint government working and funding, we should be able to lead the way in new AI modelling to replace animal testing. And potentially this could be a growth story for the country and something we could export internationally to address this issue and finally bring an end to animal testing.
Irene Campbell.
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend for those comments, and I absolutely agree that we have the potential to be leading the way in this field, and I think it's something that we should definitely be striving towards. Through my role as chair of the APPG on this topic, I have met many scientists working in the animal-free research area, including Accelerate, which is the UK's leading animal-free testing laboratory. And there is an untapped market here which is ready to grow, and we need to be investing in it. With the right government support, the sector could more than double in size by 2030, creating high-skilled jobs and positioning the UK as a global leader in producing the next generation of scientists. Licences for animal tests are granted in advance and in bulk, and surely the whole licensing system here should be reviewed. Many laboratories may only do the minimum checks and balances that are laid out in law, despite how we may talk about meeting the highest standards. When experiments are poorly designed or mistakes are made during the process, it is a waste of life and unnecessary suffering, and there are many examples of this which I'm sure will be discussed today. I will give way.
Chris Murray.
I thank the Honourable Friend for giving way and commend her work she, on this field, because she, like me, is a serious animal lover who's always stood up for animals. Many constituents have contacted me about this debate, and their primary reason for doing so is the unnecessary suffering that is caused to animals in testing, with force feeding and injections right until the end of their lives. Does my honourable friend agree with me that new technologies offer a way to achieve the goals people want to see, which is more research, but with avoiding the unnecessary suffering which is the cause of such concern to our constituents?
Irene Campbell.
I thank my honourable friend for his comments and agree with every point that has been raised. On a positive note, it is most welcome that this Labour government has published the Replacing Animals in Science strategy, something we have never seen before from previous governments. The strategy brings a lot of good news, such as £75 million of funding for the new UK Centre for the Validation of Alternative Methods. The strategy also refers to using validated alternative methods to reduce the use of non-human and dogs in dedicated cardiovascular safety studies by at least 50% by 2030, and to reduce the use of dogs in non-human primates in dedicated PK studies for human medicines by at least 35% by 2030. However, I am unsure how this will be validated, as the number of non-human primates and dogs used for these studies is unknown in the first instance, therefore creating a statistical challenge. And I would challenge that those statistics are correct. While it is good news to have a roadmap, we are not there yet. We need to ensure that this strategy is implemented with robust timelines and a clear roadmap so that we can achieve our manifesto commitment of finally phasing out cruel animal testing. On April 20th this year, the US Food and Drug Administration announced that it achieved key first-year goals in implementing its April 2025 roadmap to reducing animal testing in preclinical safety studies, which includes qualifying the first AI-based drug development tool and working to reduce or eliminate animal testing drugs have demonstrated safety from their use in humans in other countries. I think it is key that the UK continues to be a world leader in animal welfare and to build on our successes like the new strategy. However, we cannot fall behind other countries like the US and should seize upon this exciting opportunity to utilise groundbreaking new science while saying goodbye to dated and cruel testing. And I'm looking forward to the Minister's response today, as well as hearing from other members.
I was going to say to remind Mr Bob if they want to be called during this debate. Right. The question is that this House has considered the E-petition 736578 relating to animal testing. I call Bernabisi Jekti.
Thank you, Mr Twigg. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. Before I begin, I would like to draw attention to my register of interest too, and my role as an officer on the all-party parliamentary group for the phasing out of animal experiments in medical research. Mr Twigg, the phasing out of animal testing was an eye-catching pledge in the government's last manifesto, and though slow to deliver it, the strategy published late last year is the first milestone towards delivering on that intent. It was a year ago that we last discussed the topic of animal testing in Parliament. As a Member of Parliament with sadly the most animal testing infrastructure, I welcome the government's commitment to achieving this. In my own Huntingdon constituency, there are 2 sites directly involved in the use of preclinical animal testing, LabCorp and MBR Acres. I visited LabCorp shortly after being elected as the Member of Parliament for Huntingdon. It is notable that the issue of animal testing and the prevalence of the sites was never raised during the election campaign, nor during any hustings, not by any of the candidates. It is almost as if the issue isn't a topic people are keen to discuss. So following the election, I visited LabCorp in order to ensure I understood the nature of the work that is done there and the challenges of delivering preclinical testing for the pharmaceutical industry. I was public about the visit and clearly communicated the experience. I stated that I don't support animal testing, but in order to understand it, I had to meet those who undertake it. I'm sure many of those participating in the debate today or in the gallery will have seen the footage reported in the Mail on Sunday a week ago. It's difficult to watch. Puppies and macaques, particularly given the latter's recognisably human mannerisms. And I can safely add that having seen those animals in their cages, though well looked after with the obvious inevitable outcome, it is very difficult to watch those animals, particularly the macaques, with their very human mannerisms, watching Disney cartoons to keep them occupied, coming to the window to have a look at you, having a look at them, and knowing that all of those animals will be tested on and will lose their lives. And this is the price that we currently have to pay the pharmaceutical industry to save life or extend life. Much as we don't like to know where our food comes from, so the same could be said for our medicinal drugs. For all the progress made, animal testing is still a key part of the preclinical testing process. Whilst that will remain the case for the foreseeable future, it is incumbent upon the government to deliver their pledge as quickly as they can. In December, we saw the government introduce the Public Order Act 2023, Interference with Use or Operation of Key National Infrastructure Regulations 2025. This piece of legislation was introduced by the government specifically to curtail protest activity at key national infrastructure sites around the life sciences sector. The policing minister stated at that time, the legislation will cover infrastructure that primarily facilitates pharmaceutical research or the development of manufacturing of pharmaceutical products, or which is used in connection with activities authorised under the Animals Scientific Procedures Act 1986 that will include, for example, pharmaceutical laboratories, medicine and vaccine manufacturing facilities, suppliers of animals for research, and academic laboratories carrying out research involving animals. It would be extremely naive to believe that this legislation was introduced for any other reason than to address the presence and actions of Camp Beagle. It is therefore unusual that the government would create a bespoke piece of legislation specifically to target a single protest site, particularly when that piece of legislation is so poorly constructed as to be unenforceable anyway. And I think it's worth mentioning that I voted against that piece of legislation, as did the member for North Ayrshire and Arran, the member for North East Hertfordshire and the member for Bristol East. But every other Labour MP sitting in the room contributing to this debate voted in favour of it. It is no secret that MBR Acres was just a few days away from closure owing to the pressure applied by activists, predominantly via their email campaign. This piece of legislation makes sending an email to a company simply to lobby them to boycott provision of utilities a criminal offence. It also requires the company being lobbied to report that individual to the police for it to be investigated. The police then have to prove the identity of the sender without knowing which force should investigate, whether that person is even in the country. It is a nonsense. So could the Minister clarify how the government intends to criminalise people for sending emails that are not abusive or threatening and where the sender cannot even be identified? With regards to MBR Acres itself, in response to my written parliamentary question 125326 regarding the outcome of the last announced audit of the site last November, the government confirmed that the Animals and Science Regulation Unit identified no critical or major findings and no low-level concerns, identifying only 3 minor findings, including a small amount of rust on a surface, small areas of floor damage in a walkway, and a small portion of loose drain cover. Given the sheer volume of correspondence I have received on the topic of conditions at MBR Acres, it is not unreasonable to say that the two perspectives do not tally. During the heatwave last summer, there was significant concern regarding the welfare of the dogs owing to the temperature inside the sheds. Whilst I appreciate that the Minister will not have this information to hand, could he, or potentially the Security Minister, under whose brief ASRU audits sit, write to me and outline these steps implemented in order to mitigate these risks, given the likelihood of another hot spell in the coming months? Last November, the government introduced its policy paper, Replacing Animals in Science, a strategy to support the development, validation and uptake of alternative methods. This is the long-awaited strategy created to fulfil Labour's pledge to phase out animal testing. It took a while, but I do welcome the publication of this strategy, and as one of the few MPs who has actually read it, I have some questions for the Minister that I hope he'll be able to answer in his summing up. And I would hope that people could take some notes, because there are a lot of questions that are about to come. Decent ministers recently confirmed to me that the government is positioning the UK as a global leader in alternative methods via a variety of initiatives, principally including reform of the MHRA, and by setting new international benchmarks for the development, assessment and adoption of non-animal methods. So could he confirm what progress the government has made in scoping multilateral and bilateral opportunities for international engagement? In particular, whether his department has been successful in discussions with international regulators regarding harmonisation of standards and establishment of key priorities. Ministers have also previously informed me of the publication of a set of KPIs covering all elements of the strategy later this year. Is he able to expand upon the timeline for the publication of those KPIs and the accompanying dashboard? Ministers have previously informed me that work is underway to identify and collate UKRI-funded alternative methods for inclusion on the NC3R's expansion of their Gateway publishing platform. I know that this is due to be in place by the end of the year, but could the Minister provide an update on progress in alternative methods likely to be included? Further to this, UKRI also plans to publish areas of research interest for alternative methods and is due to start the work in the first half of the year. When in Q2 is that work due to commence, and has an approach now been agreed between the NC3Rs, the Medical Research Council and the Biotechnology and Biological Sciences Research Council? The government has also confirmed that the first Ministerial Board has been convened to oversee delivery of the government's arrangements for the overall strategy. Can he confirm the frequency with which it meets? Is the investment of £75 million to accelerate the development and adoption of alternative methods separate to or in addition to funding supplied to funding for 3Rs? is the 20 million of increased funding launched through the Preclinical Translational Models Hub funding call last month, part of the 75 million, or in addition to it. And additionally is the 30 million allocated to support the establishment and delivery of the UK Centre for the Validation of Alternative Methods, also in addition to that. Further to that, I know that reporting on the portfolio of investments in alternative methods is planned to commence this year. Is the Minister able to confirm when that will be given? We are already in Q2. I know the Alternative Methods Strategy Delivery Group has its next meeting scheduled for tomorrow. Would the Minister be able to share what the outcome of the first meeting was in February and what is likely to be discussed in the meeting tomorrow? The Animals and Science Committee has now published its report strengthening leading practice in the animals and science sector. Of the 11 recommendations on strengthening leading practice or further work, could the Minister outline what progress has been made thus far or he anticipates being made this year, particularly with regard to the Animals and Science Regulation Unit? And on recommendation 11, which applies to his department, what steps have DSIP ministers taken to consider how funding schemes can support the implementation of leading practice across the whole framework? I appreciate that these are some very, very specific points addressed within this speech, and I would welcome the Minister writing to me to address these questions if he is unable to answer all of them in his summing up. I'm sure his team have been furiously scribbling notes. As I've already stated, I welcome this strategy. It is a good first step towards a future where animals no longer play a part in preclinical pharmaceutical testing. But that day is still too far away. A date of 2035 sounds like wishful thinking, and an expectation that there will be exponential leaps forward in progress with the advent of AI and the rapid increases we are seeing in compute power intra-month. That may be the case, but hope is not a strategy. I hope the government can continue to push in the right direction on this issue, deliver on the pledges outlined in its strategy, and achieve its pledge to phase animals out of this process.
McCarthy.
And I want to start by paying tribute to my honourable friend for opening this debate. She's a real asset to the Petitions Committee. She's led a number of debates on animal welfare issues with great expertise. She's a real champion of animal welfare, and she's also doing great work on the all-party group. And I think what's important about the all-party group is the extent to which it is evidence-based. We can all stand here and get emotional about the horrors of animal testing and some of the things we've seen, as the honourable member from Huntingdon just said, with the undercover footage that was released of the dogs and macaques. But when we make the case, it is important to be able to present the alternative as well, and that's something that my honourable friend has been doing, as I said, with great expertise. I do want to thank the honourable member for Huntingdon for his support for, I was going to say support for MBR Acres, his support for Camp Beagle and the campaign against MBR Acres. He's quite right that some of us did vote against that effort to quell protest against it. It seems a real sledgehammer to crack a nut, and it also seems we had this debate to a small extent in the committee. I think it's unfortunate we didn't have a debate on the floor of the House as to why this measure was being brought in. I know the Minister here today isn't the Minister from the Home Office that was responsible for that piece of delegated legislation, but there are still so many questions about what sort of protest will now be possible, to what extent these laws will be used, and I hope that he has had a bit of a briefing so he can answer some of those questions. Having said that, I do think it's good to see a DSIP Minister here today. I've been around almost as long as the Lord that my honourable friend mentioned in her speech, who seems like I've been here 100 years talking about animal welfare issues, but it's only 21. But in the past, it has been very difficult when you've had that split between the DEFRA, who've got the pure animal welfare brief, and then often when we've had these debates, it's been the Home Office that has answered because they're responsible for licensing. And I remember a debate we did just before the last election where George Eustace was there, and he'd actually been an EFRA Secretary of State and a Minister before that with responsibility for animal welfare. And he was one of those who joined me in calling for one place that we could hold this issue of animal testing so that we knew we'd always get answers, and particularly when it comes to the Home Office, it's quite peripheral to the wider brief that the Minister's got. I think she covers policing and all sorts of other issues, and it is very difficult to get that focus. So I welcome the fact that the Science Minister, even if he is in the other place and not here today, does have that responsibility and has brought forward the roadmap, and I hope he's working closely with colleagues in DEFRA and the Home Office on this. As I said, we could spend a lot of time talking about the horrors of animal testing and why we want to see
it replaced. But I do also want to sort of spend quite a bit of time talking about the forward-looking and the positive signals that are being sent now about replacing it. But I wanted to sort of dwell for a little moment on the forced swim test, which my honourable friend talked about. As she said, it's particularly cruel, its use cannot be justified. She quotes from the government strategy, Replacing Animals in Science, with the government admitting the test has limited scientific validity, particularly its translational relevance to human mental health disorders. And this is more or less what I was told when I met scientific researchers at the University of Bristol a few years ago. And God knows how many times they'd carried out the tests and how many animals they'd tested it on. It must have been easily into the thousands, if not many more. But they said to me, we haven't spotted anything interesting yet, but we'll probably carry on doing it in case something interesting happens, which just seems to me, a complete exercise in futility. And it just seems like a really casual and callous approach to the purpose of tests. We want to know that if tests are being carried out, at least they have some point and they're essential. And I do accept that we are not in a position to replace all animal testing tomorrow, but we absolutely ought to be keeping it to a minimum. And the idea that you're doing these tests on mice just in case you spot something fascinating happening seems to me completely wrong. As far as I know, they've now put a pause on such tests, but they haven't committed to dropping them altogether. And as we've heard, there are still 3 licences granted, which run until 2028. And while I would like to be able to trust the scientists to down tools if they feel these tests no longer have a purpose, can I ask the Minister whether any consideration has been given to revoking these licences and what purpose is served by allowing the licences to continue? Are they ever revoked in such circumstances, or is it always reliant on scientists to make the call? And there is this conflict between the...
She's made a really sincere, excellent speech and has just made a brilliant point. And we've heard earlier in the debate that in 2023, 2.6 million animals were still being tested upon, which is a moral atrocity. And she's making the point, does she agree with me, that moving away from animal testing should lead to better scientific outcomes and greater investment in the testing that will drive those better outcomes?
Irene McCarthy.
Yeah, I think it's very important, as I said, to make the case that this isn't just about being horrified by the cruelty that's involved. It is also the fact that these tests are not, have been proved in so many cases not to be effective, not to yield useful results, not to be the best way of trying to make progress in medical discoveries. And my honourable friend did mention a couple of them. And I just do want to press a little bit further on this point about the conflict between commercial considerations. So we know that the reason that MBR Acres put pressure on the government and wanted to quell protests, my understanding is that it is under some pressure. It's finding that it's struggling to find a home for its beagles, or finding customers because of the protest, because people have quite rightly been horrified by the fact these tests are continuing. So where does that commercial pressure sit against the government stated desire, the adoption of the 3 Rs and that the things that have been set out in the animal welfare strategy and in the roadmap now to reduce the use of animals in experiments? How do we make sure that the government's stated intention prevails and those commercial considerations don't? I want to just conclude on a more positive note. It is encouraging to see the progress that's being made on NAMS and the government throwing its weight behind it with the £75 million for the new UK Centre for the Validation of Alternative Methods. And I was particularly interested to hear what my honourable friend had to say about the potential for AI to be used to help replace animal testing. She mentioned the Animalgan software developed by the FDA in the US, which could be used to determine how rats would react to chemicals without having to do new tests. She also mentioned Virtual Second Series, which has created an AI-powered virtual dog, which is trained on historic dog tests, which I have to say sounds fantastic. In the Replacing Animals in Science strategy, the government committed to setting up a new animal research institute, which will bring together data, AI cell engineering, genomic technology and cutting-edge disease modelling capabilities to generate collaborative research at scale. The University of Bristol, which, as I've said, has been involved historically in the fourth swim test, is also at the forefront of AI innovation and research, and as a result was chosen to host the Isambard AI supercomputer, one of the fastest computers in the world, which was opened by a very excited Secretary of State in July last year. And if the Minister hasn't yet had a chance to visit and learn about Isambard, it's an open invitation for him to do so. We've been told that this will spearhead scientific breakthroughs, amongst other things, on the discovery of new drugs. It could be used to analyse cell data, advanced image medical modelling, large-scale biostatistics on human data sets, medical genetic modelling, organ-on-a-chip simulations, which my honourable friend mentioned. I say all this, and probably my complete ignorance of these issues shines through, but it all sounds like it has huge potential. I know there's already a huge amount of interest from researchers wanting to use Isambard. So I will be following up with Bristol University to ask whether they have been approached by anyone wanting to use it to research NAMs, and if so, what priority they will give to such usage. I really think that there is the potential to use that super brain that we've got in the computer. We know that there's one of the reasons there's so many tests is because there's a huge duplication and replication of tests and huge number of animals involved, and it would seem to me that if we could use AI to number crunch some of that, then that could really see us coming on leaps and bounds in terms of reducing the numbers. So I hope that the university will get involved in the new institute, and I hope the Minister can say something a little more about whether he thinks that AI really is the way forward to help bring down the number of animal tests in a very significant way.
Thank you, Mr. Tweed, and it's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. And I thank the honourable member for North Ayrshire and Aaron and for opening the debate and for her ongoing commitment to this issue. I thank the petitioners for raising it, including the 201 from Taunton and Wellington and the other members in the chamber for their debate, for their speeches, which show sincerity on this issue across the floor, I think. Petitioners are right that the current system is failing on welfare, on science and on the pace of change, Mr. Twigg. It would be wrong to make out, though, that all the science is resolved. But while there are certainly areas where animal testing cannot yet be replaced, as the Honourable Lady pointed out, we could be doing a lot more. Animal testing should be ended as soon as possible. We should be doing a lot more, and this debate should spur the government into doing so, Mr. Twigg. Our country wrote the world's first animal welfare law back in 1822. The UK has a long tradition of being ahead on this issue on animal welfare, and we should be ahead now as well. The government strategy, however, published in November, which sets a welcome headline target of 35% reduction in dogs and primates used in pharmacokinetic studies by 2030. A 35% reduction 5 years away, though, is not an ambitious target and not ambitious enough, Mr. Twigg. And it's not on a statutory footing either. Like the petitioners, I'm concerned that none of the targets of the strategy are on statutory footings. They're ambitions in a policy document with no binding mechanism to ensure they're met. A 35% target for 2030 could become a 25% target in 2032 or 2035. And there's nothing in this strategy to stop that happening. So if we're serious about leading, we should be willing to put our targets into law and to lead on alternative methods. And to do so, we need those alternative methods, of course, to be validated. And following Brexit, we lost access to European testing, so it's taken 5 years to establish a new UK centre for the validation of alternative methods. Now, that's welcome. It's also 5 years overdue. But it needs to be ambitious from day one. Naming a new centre on its own won't be enough, Mr. Twigg. Last year, the regulator, the Animals in Science Regulation Unit, found 146 confirmed cases of non-compliance across 45 establishments. 43% of those related to inadequate care, such as food, water, or suitable facilities. But the regulator is funded by the very establishments that it's supposed to regulate. That is a structural conflict of interest, Mr. Twigg, and one which we should not accept. My noble friend, Lib Dem Peer Lord Clement Jones, has raised in another place. So I ask the Minister to first put the strategy's targets onto a statutory footing with binding milestones, so a 35% target by 2030 cannot slip into something entirely different. Second, to make the UK Centre for Validation of Alternative Methods ambitious from day one, properly funded, independent and able to validate methods at pace. And third, for an independent review of the regulator, the ASREU, addressing its funding conflicts of interest. The regulator should not be paid by those it regulates. The government, in responding to this debate, will no doubt remind us that carefully regulated use of animals in research remains necessary for medical reasons. But that is not enough of an answer to this petition and this debate, and it doesn't answer the questions this debate is putting before us. There's no reason the regulator should be funded by those it regulates. There is no reason our targets should not be on statutory footing, and there is no reason dogs, the obvious first candidate for replacement, should still be in repeat dose toxicity testing in up to 2030. These are reasonable, meaningful and achievable changes the government could make. They are actions the government should be taking now.
Mary Kelly-Foy.
Again, it's an honour to serve under your chairmanship, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for North Ayrshire and Arran, for securing this debate, and I'd like to thank the petitioners and campaigners who brought the issue before Parliament. Many of them were my constituents in the City of Durham, so I'm pleased to represent them here today. We often talk about giving people a voice in this place, but today we also provide one to other sentient beings. And this debate ought to be framed not just about more humane treatment for animals, but importantly about better science, better regulation and better outcomes, as well as, of course, of higher welfare standards. The government's strategy, Replacing Animals in Science, is a welcome step. It recognises that the UK should move towards phasing out animal use in all but exceptional circumstances. It also commits funding for alternatives, including the UK Centre for the Validation of Alternative Methods and a Preclinical Translational Models Hub. But the question today is whether that strategy is ambitious enough. The concerns raised by organisations such as the Camp Beagle, Animal Defenders International, the RSPCA, Humane Society International UK and Frame is that the strategy has good intentions but not yet hard enough on the delivery. And it lacks clear statutory targets, a firm timetable and proper accountability for whether animal use is actually falling. And that matters because the scale remains significant. Home Office figures show that there were around 2.6 million scientific procedures involving animals in Great Britain in 2024. This represents a negligible 1.21% decrease compared to 2023. And Animal Defenders and the Herby's Law campaign report that 2,646 procedures involved dogs, overwhelmingly beagles, and most of those procedures were for regulatory purposes. And nearly 2,000 procedures were on non-human primates, a staggering amount of which will face lengthy and stressful transportation from Africa or Asia to then endure a life of experimentation. Simply put, it feels unethical. The government has set targets to reduce the use of dogs and non-human primates in some pharmacokinetic and cardiovascular safety studies by 2030. And that's welcome, but it's limited. It doesn't amount to a clear route to end unnecessary dog testing, and it doesn't fully address the question of second species testing, where dogs are still used even when campaigners and researchers argue that the added scientific value can be weak. And there's also a serious scientific case for moving faster. The Thomas, Chancellor and Michaelis Clinical Development Report on success rates from 2011 to 2020 showed an overall likelihood of approval from phase 1 of only 7.9%. Campaigners rightly point to that as evidence that the current system is not delivering as well as patients, researchers or animals need it to. Crucially, animal models do not always translate reliably into human biology. Results can appear promising in animals, then they can fail when they reach human trials, while potentially useful treatments may be delayed or lost because animal data doesn't accurately reflect how the human body responds. And that should not make us less serious about safety, but instead to embrace methods that give us better evidence, better prediction and better outcomes. And that's why human relevant science matters. And alternatives in this area are developing quickly, such as organ-on-chip systems, human cell models, computational modelling and AI-assisted advanced imaging. These are not fringe ideas. They're increasingly central to the future of modern biomedical research. The government should therefore strengthen its strategy by setting clearer annual milestones, publishing the baseline behind its targets, giving regulations such as the MHRA a clear mandate to accept validated alternatives, and ensuring animal welfare organisations and independent scientists are involved in monitoring progress. The UK has a real opportunity to lead in humane, human-relevant science, but that will require more than warm words. It will require pace, transparency, investment, and a willingness to challenge outdated regulatory habits. Chair, when it's reported that 7 out of 10 people in Britain support the introduction of a new law that would end animal experiments in medical research by 2035, it's clear that this is a topic we must take seriously. We owe it to our constituents, and we owe it to the animals that suffer for our gain. The government has made a start. It now needs to go further and faster. Thank you.
Adrian Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I thank the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran and the petitioners for securing this debate. Nearly 120,000 people from up and down the country who've supported this petition. Many of my constituents in Waveney Valley have also taken time to write to me about this debate. And this level of public engagement reflects a clear and growing concern that the continued use of animals in testing is not ethically nor scientifically justified. And let's be clear about the scale of this issue. In 2024, more than 2.6 million scientific procedures involving living animals were carried out in the UK. 2,646 using dogs, 82 using cats, 1,936 using monkeys, and 11,483 using horses. Behind these horrifying numbers are sentient beings, subjected not to abstract procedures, but to confinement, physical invasion, distress, and pain. Investigations by organisations such as Animals International and Animal Aid have documented these practices in stark detail. Footage emerging from UK laboratories lays bare a deeply troubling reality. Animals immobilised in slings, straining against restraints, or confined for months in barren cages while subjected to repeated and invasive procedures. Dogs, overwhelmingly beagles as we've heard, are routinely force-fed substances through tubes pushed down their throats or made to inhale chemicals via tightly strapped masks, while others endure surgically implanted catheters delivering infusions into the veins. These are not short-lived interventions, but prolonged procedures, often involving twice daily dosing for months, with consequences that can include vomiting, diarrhoea, seizures, internal bleeding, organ failure, and paralysis. Yet the studies continued regardless. Some animals are kept alive until they reach the brink of severe physiological collapse, even heart failure, and even those that survive are almost invariably killed so their organs can be dissected and examined. This isn't incidental suffering. It's systemic, deliberate, and embedded within the process itself. The Green Party's long been clear that we should reduce suffering for all animals, guided by the evidence, and I'm pleased to see strong cross-party support for this today, welcoming what the government set out, but calling for the stronger ambition we must see and that's called for in Herby's law. The way we treat animals reflects our values as a society, and we have a responsibility to recognise animals as sentient beings and reduce suffering whenever it occurs. But this is not just an ethical question, it's a scientific one. We're often told that animal testing is essential for human health, yet over 90% of drugs that appear safe and effective in animals never make it through to approval for human use. That's an extraordinarily high failure rate, and it points to a system that's not only causing harm to animals, but failing to deliver for patients. The evidence is clear. Animals are not reliable proxies for human health. Differences in biology mean results often do not translate. Substances that are harmless to us can be toxic to other species, and vice versa, meaning outcomes can mislead in both directions. At the same time, the science is moving on. Non-animal methods such as advanced cell models, organ-on-a-chip technologies, or AI-driven approaches are increasingly able to deliver results that are more accurate and more relevant to humans. These are not distant possibilities. They're already being used and improving quickly. The UK should be leading on this. The government has already accepted that there's no legal requirement to carry out animal testing and that regulators can approve medicines based on non-animal data. Yet progress remains too slow. If we are serious about change, we need a proper plan to move away from animal testing altogether. That is why Herby's law matters. Named after a rescued beagle, it would set out a practical framework to phase out animal testing by 2035, while supporting researchers and industry to transition to modern alternatives. It's practical, achievable, and it already has strong support across Parliament and the public. The calls to suspend generic new licences and review existing ones also merit serious consideration. Under the Animal Scientific Procedures Act 1986, experiments on animals are authorised through licences. Concerningly, these can take the form of broad 5-year service licences granted to research organisations. These licences can allow experiments to continue even when non-animal alternatives become available during the licence period. Furthermore, even though the law requires a harm-benefit analysis before animal use is approved, under these broad licences, the specific substances and therefore the harm that the animals will face are not always known at the point of approval. It's difficult to see how this meets statutory duty. This debate is not about being anti-science. Far from it. It's about recognising that better science is available. By shifting investment and policy support towards human-relevant methods, we can improve outcomes for patients while ending unnecessary suffering for animals. The petitioners are right. The system is failing both animals and humans. We have the evidence, we have the technology, and we have the public backing. What's missing is the pace of change. So I urge the government to act, to immediately suspend all new generic service licences for toxicity testing, conduct a full review of every current licence held, and urgently deliver on its promise to replace animals in science. This is the change that we and animals deserve.
E-petition.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I believe the time has come to end animal testing in this country, and to do so with urgency, ambition and honesty. This debate has been driven by the public, and rightly so. 152 residents across Doncaster East and the Isle of Axholme have joined others across the country to tell us that the status quo is no longer acceptable. And I agree. Over 2.6 million animal procedures took place in Great Britain in 2024. Behind that number are living creatures capable of pain and distress, and we cannot simply look away from that anymore. Like many members, I am an animal lover. At home, our dog Foggy is part of the family. And thank God he is, because he's the only one that still is happy to see me when I get home on a Thursday night. And he's the only one, along with my mum, that listens in to see if my voice is on the debate on the TV. So if he is listening now, I want my slippers back because they weren't there this morning. He needs to dig them out for me. Now, my children have always struggled to understand why we treat some animals with love and protection, while others are used in ways that cause harm. Frankly, so do many adults. I do recognise that animal testing has historically played a role in medical advances. But the scientific landscape has changed. It's changed rapidly now, and there are many other emerging options out there. Human-specific technologies, from advanced cell models to computer simulations, are already providing credible and, in some cases, more accurate alternatives. This is not a question of whether we can move away from animal testing. It is a question of whether we have the political will to lead that transition. The principle of replacement, reduction and refinement has taken us some of the way, but it's no longer enough. We need a fourth R, replacement. Replacement at pace. A clear, time-bound strategy to phase out animal testing wherever alternatives exist and to drive innovation where they do not. That means scaling up investment in non-animal methods, fast-tracking their validation so regulators can rely on them, and using the full weight of government to remove barriers to their adoption. It also means being prepared to challenge outdated regulatory requirements that still default to animal testing, even when better options are available. Now, this Labour government has rightly placed growth, science and innovation at the heart of its agenda. There is a real opportunity here in Britain to lead the world in ethical science, creating high-value jobs while ending practices that the public increasingly rejects. But leadership requires clarity. So I'll say this. We should set a clear national mission to end animal testing, with milestones, accountability and transparency built in. Not warm words, but measurable progress. Testing of cosmetic products and their ingredients on animals was banned in the UK in 1998, and the testing of completed household products was banned in 2015. Today, I support Herby's law, a bold step towards a future where animals are no longer used in the name of science. The law will prompt a decade of change and would mandate the replacement of animals in medical research in the UK by 2035, replacing them with humane, effective alternatives. It's a commitment to progress, a commitment to compassion, and a commitment to a brighter future for all. We can do that, we should do that, and now we must get on and deliver that. Mr. Twigg, it said, "A true friend leaves paw prints on your heart." Our heads and our hearts, we need to use them now to stop testing on dogs immediately and then move on to deliver Herby's law.
Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. Can I thank the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran for her passionate introduction of this topic. I also want to thank the 238 constituents from my constituency of Didcot and Wantage who signed this petition, and the many who've written to me and some who I've met at constituency surgeries. There are three key reasons why we need to do much better on animal testing and move towards its end. The first is the fact that it's unethical in many cases. It has distressing side effects and often continues the suffering of animals when completely unnecessary. Long-lasting confinement to small cages, continued lack of social interaction and intrusive experiments can all contribute to extreme emotional and physical effects. Secondly, animal testing leads to detachment from recognising the fact that animals are living beings themselves. According to the National Library of Medicine, the emotional and social behaviours of dogs and cats, for example, are comparable to those of young children. Now, I will declare an interest here in that personally my animal of choice, my favourite animal is a cat, and it is absolutely possible to have a conversation with a cat. I appreciate many in this room will lead this as further evidence to question my sanity, but I genuinely have had prolonged conversations with cats, admittedly on their terms and using their language. And one of the things that's wonderful about cats is their enormous diversity of personalities. They all have their own character, their own likes and dislikes, and that is why they're so fascinating. And as outlined by by Peter, PETA, animals in laboratories are treated like disposable laboratory equipment, rather than as emotional living beings that they are. Animals being tested can experience psychological distress, including anxiety and depression. And the third key reason, as has been said by other honourable members, is the availability of alternatives. There are several emerging human-relevant models which can replace animal testing. Artificial intelligence has been mentioned, and then there's the advanced use of human cells and tissues, which we hope can provide results that are much more relevant to people.
Now, having mentioned cats, it's very sad to see that the 2024 statistics of scientific procedures on living animals in Great Britain showed that the number of experimental procedures used on cats increased by 30% between 2023 and 2024. We need to be going in the other direction. And many constituents have written to me expressing their concerns about the treatment of beagles, as the Honourable Member of Huntingdon has said, covered that topic in detail. And they've also voiced concern about the seemingly contradictory approach that the government's taking. So despite publishing its long-awaited strategy on animal testing in November 2025, since then the government has authorised the use of more than 6.5 million animals to be used in experiments over the coming years. These types of experiments have been authorised by the Home Office, monkeys subject to invasive brain surgery, things to do with eyes on rabbits, bile being collected from dogs, and many other very upsetting things which other members have also described. So I think in conclusion, Mr Twigg, I think the government is right to say that in its strategy it is taking a step forward, and I know that many campaigners will welcome that. And the government is right to say we need a realistic plan for how we can end all animal testing and find other ways to safely test new medicine and treatments. But I think many of my constituents and many campaigners will feel that what is being proposed so far does not go fast enough and it does not go far enough. So I look forward to hearing the Minister's comments.
Thank you, Mr Twigg. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I congratulate my constituency neighbour, the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran, for opening this important and timely debate. I must declare an interest as the chair of the APPG for cats, so very interested in the Honourable Member's comments about conversations with them, to which many will relate. We are fundamentally a nation of animal lovers. More than 60% of households in the UK own a pet, or are owned by them in the case of cat owners. And for millions of families across the country, our pets, our other companion animals, are not simply animals. They are beloved members of our family. We care deeply about their welfare, and rightly so. That's why I welcome this government's commitment to act on the recommendations of the Competition and Markets Authority on veterinary services, helping reduce the cost of pet care at a time when many households are still feeling the strain of rising costs, because cost should never be a barrier for getting our beloved animals treated when they're sick. But whilst we rightly focus on easing pressures on pet owners, which is as much a welfare issue as it is a cost of living issue, we must also confront the wider question about how animals are treated in our society, particularly those hidden from public view in laboratories and testing facilities. At its heart, animal testing is a moral issue, it's an animal welfare issue, but it's also increasingly clear that it is a scientific and economic issue as well. I welcome the government's Replacing Animals in Science strategy, delivering on our manifesto commitment. That strategy is backed by £75 million of funding to accelerate safe and effective alternative methods, including £30 million for the UK Centre for the Validation of Alternative Methods. The strategy includes a target that aims to use validated alternative methods to reduce the use of dogs and non-human primates in dedicated pharmacokinetic studies for human medicines by at least 35% by 2030. The strategy also sets a target to aim to use validated alternative methods to reduce the use of non-human primates and dogs in dedicated cardiovascular safety studies by at least 50% by 2030. The continued use of animals in experiments is not only inhumane, it is very often ineffective, as my honourable friend so eloquently outlined earlier in the debate. Dogs, for example, continue to be used in scientific testing despite clear biological differences between dogs and humans. They absorb drugs differently, their gastric pH levels differ from ours, their metabolic enzymes function differently, their cardiovascular systems are different too, with higher heart rates and distinct electrical activity regulating the heartbeat. These are not minor differences, they are fundamental biological distinctions that can make dogs poor predictors for how treatments will behave in human beings. And the consequences are plain to see. Developing a new medicine on average takes around 14 years. costing more than £1 billion, and yet more than 95% of drugs fail before reaching patients. That's not simply an inefficient system, it's evidence that elements of our drug development model are no longer fit for purpose, and continued reliance on animal testing is part of that problem. But behind the statistics is the ethical reality. Animals used in experiments are subject to invasive procedures, prolonged confinement, and real distress, often with lasting physical and physiological harm. The British public are fully aware of the scale of this, and that's why they are demanding change. And indeed, they are demanding it. More than 7 in 10 Brits support a ban on animal testing, according to a YouGov poll earlier last year. Change is the slogan that this government was elected on, and change on this issue is eminently possible. Around the world, momentum is building towards modern alternatives, human-relevant technologies, advanced cell modelling and AI-driven methods that are often more accurate, more efficient and more humane than animal experimentation. I urge the government to move forward with Herby's law and set a clear national pathway to phase out animal experiments over the next decade, working closely with scientists, researchers and industry to accelerate the transition to modern alternatives. This is not a choice between compassion and progress. We can achieve both. We can lead the world in pioneering better science, we can reduce unnecessary suffering, and we can build a future in which medical innovation is not dependent on outdated, inhumane practices. That would be a victory for science, a victory for patients, and above all, a victory for animals and their welfare.
Adam Dance.
Thank you, Mr. Twigg. And I thank the honourable member for leading this debate. I'd also like to recognise and thank the hundreds of Yeovil constituents who signed this petition and previous petitions on this subject. Research now shows the failing rate of the translation of drugs from animal testing to human treatments is around 92% and has been for the past few decades. This failure is due to safety concerns or because the product does not work. But more than anything, testing on animals, including thousands of dogs and primates, is cruel. Like lots of my constituents, I have a lovely dog called Roo. No matter how hard your day is, when you see that smile and waggy tail, it makes everything so much better. We love our pets like family, so when we see videos of dogs and other animals used for testing in poor conditions, I can't help think of my Roo. Of course, we have regulations meant to make sure testing is ethical, but the government's own Animals in Science Regulation Unit reported for 2024 shows some establishments are failing still to provide proper care for testing animals. This is not good enough and we should stop immediately. So given that it is often not efficient and is cruel, what my constituents tell me they want to see is a clear pathway to phasing out animal testing as soon as possible. I say that because as soon as possible we must do. They particularly want to see an end to animal toxicity testing. We have a real shot at this thanks to amazing developments in AI and large data sets, calling cell engineering, cutting-edge disease modelling and other technology and methods. In that context, the government replacing Animals in Science strategy is a strong start, and I welcome the funding commitments that have come with it, but I hope the Minister can answer a few questions. On standards, beyond increasing the number of inspectors, what steps are being taken to strengthen regulation and oversight of animal testing? If the government will not commit to a clear target for phasing out animal testing. On AI alternatives, when will we see regulation guidance on AI-informed decision-making? And can the Minister tell us how the government will keep guidance up to date, given how quickly AI is developing? Finally, it is great that the government is committed to international leadership and cooperation on ending testing on animals. Can the Minister tell us what action this has translated into so far? And tell us what is being done to push the private sector to invest more development and using alternatives. When we cannot be sure it's effective, testing on animals is not science, it is just violence, and my constituents want no part in it. Thank you.
Ruth Jones.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today. And I want to start by paying tribute to my honourable friend for North Ayrshire and Arran for bringing this debate on behalf of the Petitions Committee. And I know she is a fantastic, tireless champion of the rights of animals and does a great job chairing the APPG on phasing out animal experiments, of which I'm proud to be a member. I also want to thank the 211 constituents in Newport West and Islwyn who signed this petition to end animal testing. And the fact that the public gallery is so full today is testament to how important this subject is to so many across the UK. Now, we've already heard that the number of procedures in 2024 was some 2.6 million, which was just 2% lower than the preceding year. Whilst 2024 marked the lowest number of scientific procedures involving living animals since 2001, the pace of reduction is far too slow. Britain, as we've already heard, is proudly badged as a nation of animal lovers and as a world leader in animal welfare. It is critical, however, that we don't rest on our laurels. Indeed, continued leadership requires urgent commitments to further reforms to the regulatory, licensing and inspection regime governing the use of animals in science in the UK. And I aim to touch on each of these areas in my speech, but I will be brief, as I can see the Chair's eyebrows raising there. Turning first to regulation, I greatly welcome this Labour government's new Replacing Animals in Science strategy and its clear ambition for phasing out basket grouping of unnecessary tests on animals in the near future. I particularly support funding for a new UK Centre for the Validation of Alternative Methods and investment in non-animal method technologies. Whilst the strategy is detailed and comprehensive, I still believe there are areas where we can go further. Embedding the targets to phase out routine tests prioritised as part of Baskets 1 and 2 in law would provide absolute certainty to both the scientific community and campaigners of our commitment to end the use of animals in testing. Such a step could also bring in wider investment in UK scientific research, strengthening our position as a global leader in the development of animal-free testing methods. I would therefore urge the Minister to commit to introducing Herby's law and enshrining the targets committed to in the recent strategy in legislation. Turning now to licensing, as I've raised previously in Westminster Hall debates, I continue to believe the Animal in Science Regulation Unit needs urgent reform. One of the key roles of the ASRU is administrating the licensing regime created by ASPA. This is critical to reducing the number of animals used in scientific testing, as the Act already requires proactive consideration of the 3 Rs framework, replacing, reducing and refining the use of animals in such experiments. This is supposed to ensure that animals are only used as a last resort, but the embedding of this approach needs strengthening. This was a key reflection of the RAL report published in 2023, which voiced concerns that the welfare inspection regime risked embedding a focus on, and I quote, box ticking, rather than ensuring a culture of genuine commitment to advancing the 3 Rs. I greatly welcome the government recognition of the need to strengthen the ethical review approval process to ensure that animals are only used where there is no alternative, in line with the findings of the RAL report. I would therefore ask the Minister to report on the progress being made by his department in strengthening application of the 3 Rs following publication of the Animals in Science Committee's January report and forthcoming report in September. Of particular importance is strengthening the ASRU's understanding of the rapid developments in non-animal methods, or NAMs. This is essential to ensuring that effective application of the 3 Rs is effective and in line with international best practice, such as that now being implemented by the US Food and Drug Administration as part of their own roadmap. And it's interesting that the US is now ahead of us in this particular area. And I would urge the Minister, we need to get back on top here. Responsibility for driving this change sits directly with ministers with statutory duties due to assess for the 3 Rs, particularly replacement sitting with the Home Secretary. As such, ministers must drive the necessary reform of the ASRU, ensuring they have the expertise to effectively and independently verify whether applications have been appropriately evaluated against NAMs. The ASRU has typically been composed of vets who, unfortunately, given the fast-moving nature of the field, do not always have up-to-date expertise in modern NAMs, including organ-on-a-chip and computational biology. Those handling applications need to be well-versed in these technologies and to be able to engage in critical questions around scientific methodologies and data validation, rather than being reliant on a replacement checklist. ASPA requires that scientific satisfactory NAMs are used wherever possible. Given this and the Section 2A duties on the Home Secretary, and I appreciate it's a different department, but I would ask the Minister what steps they are taking to improve the training and expertise available to the ASIU inspectors to allow them to effectively, independently verify application compliance with ASPA. Of particular concern are tests undertaken the so-called generic project licences, as highlighted by Animal Aid and Animals International. These licences are granted without knowing the substances being tested, and as such a harm-benefit analysis cannot have been done. I would therefore ask the Minister what specific steps are they taking to review generic project licences to avoid unnecessary harm and strengthen application of the 3 Rs. And I appreciate it's a different department, but his department will be working in lockstep, I'm sure, with the Home Office. So I look forward to the response. Turning to enforcement, adherence to ASPA within licensed premises also continues to be a sign of significant concern. The latest annual report from the ASIU made extremely grim reading. The 146 reported cases of non-compliance with legal requirements of licensing conditions highlight an ongoing failure to prevent appalling animal suffering in laboratories. This includes extreme cases of animals drowning or starving to death. In total, these cases detail the suffering of over 22,000 animals. These numbers are significant, but unfortunately they only reflect breaches self-reported to the ASIU. My fear is the numbers are far greater than those documented. So this only underlines the importance of an effective inspection regime and promoting a proactive culture of safeguarding animal welfare. Despite the ASIU issuing over 15,000 licences in 2024, at the end of that year, the ASIU only had 8.2 full-time equivalent inspectors. This means that just 68 establishments were inspected in 2024, with only 10 of those inspections being unannounced. I therefore welcome commitments made by this government to increase the number of veterinary and medical inspectors working for the ASIU, and I would be grateful if the Minister or the other department could confirm whether the government has been successful in recruiting to meet the previously stated target of 22 inspectors by March this year. In closing, Mr Twigg, the continued testing on animals demands moral leadership. This requires urgent implementation of the Replacing Animals in Science strategy, strengthening enforcement of ASPA and using Britain's unique position as a global leader in animal welfare and pharmaceuticals to chart a global path towards ending animal testing once and for all. Again, I thank the Petitions Committee for bringing this debate to this place, and I urge the Minister to go faster in eradicating animal testing. The public is impatient and want change quickly, and so do we. Thank you.
Chris Hincliffe.
Thank you, Mr Twigg. It's an honour to serve with you in the chair, and I congratulate my honourable friend for North Ayrshire and Aaron for an excellent opening speech. Mr Twigg, all life is a miracle, and every living creature has an intrinsic value we cannot measure or put price on. So I'm not in the least bit surprised that hundreds of my constituents for North East Hertfordshire have signed this petition. Chair, we rightly expect the highest standards for animals bred in this country and should demand the same for those imported from abroad, and the British people want tough penalties on cruelty, and Labour's animal welfare agenda, from tackling puppy farming to ending trail hunting, brings policy closer to the public's values. These same values matter when we consider animal testing. Given the invasive, painful and often lethal nature of these experiments, the burden of justification has to be immense. It is not enough to say that the ends justify the means. The ends themselves have to be clearly achievable, necessary and proportionate enough to warrant such suffering. In other words, we cannot morally justify harming animals simply because we consider ourselves a more intelligent species. And if some disagree with that statement, I think it is a useful thought experiment to consider whether we would accept it as morally justifiable and acceptable for a provably more intelligent species to experiment on our families and loved ones for their own purposes. Would we really stand by and nod along stoically that all species can rightly be used however they wish by another that has a more developed brain? I think not. A genuinely moral justification can only be attempted if the scale of suffering prevented by testing on living creatures provably and overwhelmingly outweighed the suffering of the test patients themselves. Too often, that case is simply not made. When you weigh the public interest in research and medical progress against the imperative to minimise harm to animals,
the balance just doesn't stack up to scrutiny. Animal testing is often cruel and would often pass for barbaric sadism in any other context. More profoundly still, its scientific value is often overstated. As we've heard repeatedly today, there is growing evidence that animal models can be unreliable predictors for human outcomes, and we have an increasing range of scientific tools and models that offer a more accurate alternative. So, Chair, if the suffering we are inflicting on these animals is profound, but the result is uncertain, can the means really be justified at all? Herby's law would help correct that balance, a phased transition by 2035 away from animal experimentation and towards more effective alternatives, including human-specific methods backed by training and support for scientists. More than 2 million animals were used in experiments in our country in 2024 alone. That is suffering on an immense scale, affecting animals alive today and countless animals yet to be bred into a system of pain. Herby's law offers the chance to turn a historic page, reducing suffering, improving science, and moving our laws closer to the values the public already hold. That would be a profound step forward for animals living now and those spared this fate in the future. So I urge ministers to adopt Herby's law in full as a matter of urgency.
Alex Mayer.
Serve under your chairmanship. I think I must be the night owl of this debate. Replacing the use of animals in experiments is, I have long believed, the right thing to do. Indeed, it is the mark of a civilised society that we treat animals well. It is ethically sound, but also, I would argue, can be economically beneficial too. Replacement technologies are a real growth opportunity for the life sciences sector, and when human-based models are more accurate and relevant, this can save time, aiding profitability. A KPMG UK Life Sciences report argued that if new technologies are employed, they have the potential to accelerate market entry for innovative products by up to 2 years, potentially saving up to £7.8 million per product. And what's more, the UK is well positioned to lead. We have a really strong life sciences sector, especially across the east of England, the expertise and the infrastructure. If we unleash our scientists along with a government with really clear objectives, the future, I believe, is bright. And it's what people want. Petitions like the one we're debating today, and poll after poll, and the number of people in the gallery shows that the UK public really want to see action. And a statistic that I find interesting is that 76% of people want to see funding diverted from animal experiments to animal-free methods. They don't want animals to suffer. And we've heard so many examples throughout the debate, like the 2,646 dogs that were used in experiments in 2024, leading to horrific outcomes and vomiting and diarrhea, bleeding, organ failure, and ultimately death. I think we can do better, and I welcome the government's leadership on this issue. We can very much learn, I think, from the ban on animal testing for cosmetics brought in 1998 in the UK, under, of course, a Labour government, and then across all of the EU in 2013. I would argue that the cosmetic testing bans pushed science to meet the legal deadlines. It accelerated work to develop and approve new non-animal methods. The ban stimulated big investment, too, in non-animal methods. Over €238 million in EU funding was spent on this between 2007 and 2011. And without the legal deadlines set by those bans, it's likely that today many of the non-animal methods we know simply would not exist. I'm also struck that whenever I read research websites or documents, how often so many of them are at pains to point out that they stick to the letter of the law, no more, no less, or perhaps more importantly, no less, no more, which is why I think the law must be a key driver of change. Science, as we have heard, is moving at pace. Organ-on-a-chip systems, human cell-based models, computer models, AI, which we hear about in all kinds of debates, but I think is a particular one that we can take heart from here. And I saw actually that when the astronauts went off to the moon recently, that they took some of those organs on a chip with them. That is progress. You know, we used to take monkeys and dogs and masks blasted into space, and now taking an organ on a chip instead. but back from space down to Earth again. This is something clearly where Britain can lead, but it also involves a truly international approach. Back in, I think it was 2018, I think, I went to the United Nations alongside Cruelty Free International, and we handed over a petition of 8 million signatures from across the world to call for a global ban on animal testings for cosmetics. And I suppose I was struck by a couple of things. One was it was hard to find in the UN kind of where the responsibility for that sat, because very much like, you know, it covers different departments here in the UK. That is also an issue across the world as well. And also that actually we haven't even managed a global ban on cosmetics testing on animals yet. It's only about 45 countries to date that have secured that. So we need British leadership on that as well as on the testing for medical procedures. And the reason that this matters is that many of the testing procedures carried out here in the UK are often to meet overseas requirements for pharmaceuticals, so it's not something that we can tackle alone. So I'd be very grateful if the Minister could outline when he replies how, when working with our international partners to achieve harmonisation, to have more international cooperation, to have consistent frameworks, and to make sure that we have transparent data exchange. I also think it's important that we are positive about our scientists. We absolutely hate it, we abhor it when we see researchers carrying out experiments that we don't think should be happening on animals. But we cannot ever be anti-scientists, because it's scientists that are going to make sure we have these brand new methods. We need them, so I think we have to be relentlessly pro-scientist in this, because I have no doubt that our amazing scientists can rise to this challenge, especially when the government sets out really clear expectations. So together we can ensure that the UK is at the forefront of innovation and meets the expectations of the public that we serve.
Dr. Danny Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. It's an honour to serve under your chairship, and I want to thank my friend from North Ayrshire and Erin for securing this debate and for her tireless championing of animal welfare in Parliament. This is not the first debate being secured on animal welfare issues, and it really is making a difference. And for everyone who's turned up in the gallery today, we rarely have the gallery full. We can see how many people support animal welfare and care about Herby's law and ending animal testing. And obviously many people, like everyone said, they've had a lot of correspondence about this, and many people in Winchester have contacted me as well. I won't repeat everyone's arguments because they're all very eloquent and very well put forward. But I will just reiterate that the intelligence of an animal doesn't have any relation to its capacity to suffer. So you can be sentient, an animal can be sentient, it will experience pain, it will experience emotions, it will experience suffering, it will experience mental distress in the same way we do. And all the research that has been done has shown that animals certainly have the same range of emotions and even depth of emotions as humans do. Now, they may get sort of excited or scared about different things than we do, but the actual lived experience is as real to them as ours is to us. And so many people mention their pets, and we've got a Labrador called Moose, and you know, with the way he comes flying into the kitchen when he hears the fridge open in excitement, or you know, the guilt he quite clearly feels when he's caught on the sofa and he's not meant to be. You know, these and certainly as a vet, having seen animals in variety of species, there's horses, cattle, dogs, cats, chickens, in states of distress, in injury, are sick. Certainly the emotions and suffering they feel is as strong as any person. And so after years on the British Veterinary Association Policy Committee, which was back several years ago now, I was serving on that, where the British Veterinary Association very much supported the reduce and refine and replace model. We're in a very exciting time, because it does feel as though we've finally got the technology that means that we really could move away from this in a meaningful way and in a very quick way. everyone's talked about computer modelling, organs on a chip, AI, the way you can model protein folding and test various treatments and pharmaceuticals without having to use animals and potentially get even more valuable results is a really, really exciting time. And we need to, as a country and as a government, ensure that we're supporting our life sciences industry to do this. And we know that life sciences are coming forward with some of the best exciting breakthroughs in medicine to help solve a whole load of diseases that we never thought could be treated, cancer treatments as well, rare diseases, and they're also vital to growing the economy as well. But one thing I would ask of the Minister specifically is, as we do all we can to support the life sciences industry, both in developing new technologies and in moving away from animal testing, is there any work being done to ensure that we don't inadvertently offshore animal testing? Because as upsetting as that is to have animal testing in the UK, there are standards that are higher than anywhere else in the world. And what I would hate to see happen, and I'm sure everyone will be united in this, is that we somehow ban animal testing here and move away from it here, and it's simply offshored to somewhere where there's even less regulation and there's even more suffering caused as a consequence of that. I also want to bring up the issue of drugs that have already been tested, the licensing of them. So currently, drugs are tested on animals. If they pass animal testing, they go on to humans. If they pass human testing, they get a license. Now, they've been proven to work in animals, and yet the animals do not have a license, and the drugs cannot be used in them. And it seems as though if something has passed safety tests and been proven to work in animals, there should be automatic licensing, or what we call dual licensing, to ensure the animals that have been tested on should then have the benefits of those drugs. And currently that isn't the case. And we also have a situation as well where drug testing can pass animal tests, fail human tests, but then there's nothing that can be used in the animals, even though they pass those tests. Although we want to move away from animal testing, it seems wrong that animals cannot mutually benefit from a legal perspective from the testing that's already been done. And there's I hosted an event last week by the Humanimal Trust, which is calling for dual licensing. It's academics at University of Surrey at the vet school there. And I'd be very keen for the Minister, if he's interested, to meet with that team, because they've done a lot of work on this issue as well. As we look at the update in the Veterinary Surgeons Act, there's currently a cascade where you prescribe drugs for animals, and sometimes pharmaceutical companies can get a retrospective license. So, for example, there might be a human drug that is used in animals, and it's used fine, it's working really well, and then the drug company will then do the research and get a license for that specific drug, and then no one else can use it, and it becomes very expensive. And so we'd like to look at how the Veterinary Surgeons Act and what we call the cascade of how you prescribe for animals means that drugs that have been proven to work in humans and animals can be more easily prescribed. And a really good example many people have here is that you go to the vet, they prescribe you paracetamol, it costs a lot of money, and then you discover that paracetamol is £16 in a shop. You're not allowed to prescribe, as a vet, paracetamol for a dog. It's not legal, the vet would get struck off, so they're not trying to fleece you. That is how the law works at the moment, and I'd be really keen that, along with the Veterinary Surgeons Act being updated, which it desperately needs to do, we look at prescribing rules and licensing as a big holistic piece of work. And finally, I'm very proud that the Lib Dems and Coalition did manage to bring forward that work to stop the testing of household animals on animals. I'm very proud to be an honorary senior lecturer at Bristol University at the vet school there in the area of One Health. So anyone who doesn't know that, it's the recognition that human health, animal health and environmental health are all completely interlinked. And there's many diseases like antimicrobial resistance that affect humans and animals. We know that 75% of diseases, new and emerging infectious diseases, are those that can potentially cause a pandemic from animal origin. They're often related to farming practices as well. And it is impossible to improve human health, it's impossible to improve environmental health or animal health without seeing the three being completely linked and addressing them all. And I think that moving away from animal testing, but having more accurate testing, and also having the right licensing and regulation to ensure that animals and humans can mutually benefit from scientific advances is not only an opportunity, but it's a morally right thing to do. Thank you.
Peter Fortune. Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and a privilege to respond to this debate on behalf of His Majesty's most loyal opposition. It's actually my first time responding to a petitions debate, and I'm happy to do it under your chairmanship, sir. I must also congratulate the Honourable Member for North Ayrshire and Arran for most ably leading the debate. Finally, I would like to thank the more than 100,000 people who took the time to sign this e-petition. The previous Conservative government had a strong record on improving animal welfare standards across the board. This includes the Animal Welfare Livestock Exports Act 2024, which bans the export of live animals, including cattle, sheep and pigs for slaughter and fattening from Great Britain. The Animal Welfare Sentencing Act 2021, which increased the maximum prison sentence for animal cruelty from 6 months to 5 years. The Animal Welfare Sentience Act 2022, which recognises vertebrate animals as sentient beings for the first time. The Animals Penalty Notices Act 2022, which created new financial penalties for those who commit offences across animal health and welfare against farm animals, zoo animals and pets. And the Glue Traps Offences Act 2022, which bans the use of glue traps in England in all but the most exceptional circumstances. The testing of products and medicines on animals has always been an emotive topic and one on which many people hold extremely strong views. So it is absolutely right that animal testing is an area that is heavily regulated. What is clear is that there is a national consensus that animals ought to be treated with dignity and respect. And I am pleased that the government have continued to take the welfare of animals as seriously as the previous government did. The use of protecting animals or any experimental or other scientific procedure which causes pain, suffering and distress or lasting harm to the animal is regulated by the Animals Scientific Procedures Act 1986. Scientific procedures covered by the Act are controlled using a triple licensing system enforced by the Home Office. This requires a personal licence for the scientific investigator, a licence for the establishment where the procedure is to take place, and a project licence which contains details of the animals to be used and the procedures to be performed. The Act requires a cost and benefit analysis to be performed, weighing the likely adverse effects on the animals against the scientific learning arising from the procedure. The UK has a policy to limit the number of animals used in science through replacement, reduction and refinement of research design, the 3 Rs. This requires licence applicants to demonstrate that they have considered using non-animal alternatives as far as possible. Moreover, under existing legislation, the use of animals in research is prohibited if there is a non-animal method available that could be used instead. Put simply, animals can only be used in research when no alternative methods are available. 2.6 million scientific procedures involving living animals were carried out in Great Britain in 2024. 73% of the animals used in these procedures were mice. This figure seems huge. However, it must be recognised that this is down by 37% on the recent peak of 4.1 million in 2015, which is a welcome development, but there is definitely more work that needs to be done. It's been hugely valuable to hear the range of views from all those who have taken part in this debate, and I want to thank all honourable and right honourable members for their contributions to what I feel has been a very constructive debate today. And there were lots of passionate interventions, especially the one for the member from Bromsgrove, which gave us particular food for thought around the testing for Botox. But just to focus on the substantive contributions, my honourable friend, the member for Huntingdon, did his job as a local MP and visited a lab to give us an understanding of the scenario. It's difficult for us to think about what goes on in there, and we thank him for setting out that for us. The member for Bristol East talked about the pragmatic approach to testing, but also really talked about an aggressive and urgent push to move to alternative processes as soon as possible. The member for Taunton and Wellington stresses that, especially in an area as important as this, ambition is not enough and a strategy needs to be urgently implemented. The member for the City of Durham spoke about the ethics involved and showed that whilst animals themselves may not have a voice, honourable members here can provide one for them, and the honourable member did that extraordinarily well. The member for Waveney Valley talked about the possibility of using AI to replace experimentation and talked about not being anti-science, but talked about better science. The member for Doncaster East reminded us of the deep relationships we can have with animals, and I do hope that his slippers are returned very soon. And the member for Didcot and Wantage developed this theme of our relationship with animals and told us of his conversations with cats. Nobody has ever won a debate with a cat, and we could use some of that feline tenacity in pushing this issue through. The member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South again stressed the need to move to modern alternatives, and this was again highlighted by the member for Yeovil. The member for Newport West raised the important questions about licensing and enforcement. The member for North East Herefordshire raised important questions about morality. And I think to finish, the member for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard talked about the mark of a civilised society, which was treating animals well. And I personally concur with that statement. Let me stress that my party is keen to support any work that aims to accelerate the point at which animal research and testing is no longer necessary, having been fully replaced by effective alternatives wherever possible. I welcome that the government has now published a roadmap for the phasing out of animal testing. While we support its broad aims, there are concerns, namely that life sciences research and investment could move overseas to countries which test on animals but to far lower standards. And here I echo the point made by the Honourable Member for Winchester. And this is because regulators have set out that certain products still require animal testing. Medicines, drugs and vaccines are manufactured for sale around the world, and companies can move their operations elsewhere where the ethical and clinical regulations around animal testing are much laxer. So I would ask that in winding up, the Minister could address this point. I would also like to touch on the timeline for the government's roadmap and ask the Minister to set out how the 2030 target for a 35% reduction in the use of dogs and non-human primates is backed up by alternative methods and actually achievable. And finally, I would ask the Minister to set out how the government plans to report to the House on whether these milestones are being met and what happens if alternative methods are not validated in time. The goal of seeing no animals suffer needlessly in a laboratory is one we all share, but this vision is not enough on its own. Move too slowly, and we portray the millions of people who rightly find the continued use of animals in laboratories morally unacceptable. Move too fast, without validated alternatives, and we risk both patient safety and the very sector that funds the research we all depend on. We will continue to ask these questions of the government and hold the government accountable on their actions.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr Stewart. It's a great pleasure, as always, to serve with you and the Chair at this really important debate. And can I thank members for their contributions to this debate so far, particularly to my honourable friend, the member for North Ayrshire and Arran, not just for being a doughty campaigner for our own constituents, but for being a doughty campaigner for all of our constituents, pets and animals right across the country. She's done that since she came into this place in 2024 and deserves a great deal of respect and admiration for it. Can I also just say a big thank you at the start to the number of signatories on the E-petition and the many people in the gallery, and thank each and every one of them for taking the time to sign this. I look forward to the day where we can finally bring an end to animal testing and the use of dogs in scientific research. However, that day is not yet quite with us, unfortunately. Our direction of travel, though, is very clear. We want to replace animals in science wherever possible, and that's why our manifesto in 2024 committed us to partner with scientists, industry and civil society as we work towards the phasing out of animal testing. Our approach is to achieve that by setting it out in the replacement animals in science strategy that many members have talked about, that we published back in November last year. This is a groundbreaking strategy. It brings together funding, infrastructure and regulatory partners so that validated alternatives can move from the lab into routine use safely and at pace. I know many members have talked about pace, and pace is the key issue here.
However, for now, the carefully regulated use of animals, including dogs in scientific research, unfortunately remains. So let me expand on, firstly, our ambition to phase out animal research, and secondly, while given the current position of science, we are not yet fully ready to end testing on dogs and other animals. But let me set out the plan that we want to put in place to do so. The petition asks the Government to accelerate the move to human-relevant alternative methodologies, and that is exactly what this strategy is about. It's about speeding up development and validation, increasing uptake in practice, and working with regulators so that when alternatives are proven, they're accepted and used. This strategy is not just words, as many people have talked about. It's actually backed by £75 million of funding to accelerate safe and effective alternative methods. And for the member for Huntingdon, I'll break down that shortly. We're already delivering at pace, working with regulators and partners to streamline routes for validated alternatives to be accepted, backing researchers with new funding through the UK RI, and supporting the NC3Rs, which works nationally and internationally, which many people have mentioned, to drive the uptake of alternative technologies and ensure that advances are reflected in policy, reflected in practice, and regulations on animal research are seen through. Nearly £16 million of new investment has been announced through the Medical Research Council, Welcome and Innovate UK, working in partnership with NC3Rs to accelerate the development of human disease models. The MRC has also launched a £20 million funding competition to establish a preclinical translational human in vitro models hub, and Innovate UK has committed a further £2 million in non-animal methods for assessing the preclinical pharmacokinetics and cardiovascular safety of new medicines, which have the potential to reduce the use of dogs and non-human primates. We are building the collaboration and infrastructure needed to scale alternatives into everyday research and development in safety and assessments where it is safe to do so and effective to do so. We are also working to increase regulatory confidence so that when alternatives are proven, they are accepted and used consistently in practice and at pace. We are consistently pushing change. In 2024, the use of dogs in experimental procedures decreased by 29%, many members have said that already, compared to 2023, and the broader trend is towards reducing animal use as alternatives continue to improve. But we are not complacent, and we shouldn't be complacent. We want to get that as close to zero as possible. And the strategy sets out how we are working towards a world where the use of animals in science is eliminated in all but very exceptional circumstances. This will be achieved by creating a research and innovation system that replaces animals with alternative methods wherever possible, not by preventing necessary research and safety testing with no alternative available. By streamlining the process for bringing alternatives forward, the Government will accelerate our transition away from animal use while continuing to support crucial research and innovation. And as the science advances, we will use every opportunity to phase out animals wherever we can. Mr Stewart, if I could just run through some of the issues around the strategy, but also address some of the comments that honourable members have made. Some of the Minister in the other place, Minister Valance, is responsible for this area in the House of Lords, and I am the responsible Minister in the House of Commons. And this is what Minister Valance uses, the most advanced scientific brain that I've ever come across in government. He said, and I think this is worth just emphasising about the strategy, the Government is proud to lead a new era in advancing innovative and effective approaches to scientific research and development. We are committed to delivering on our manifesto pledge to partner with scientists, industry and civil society as we work towards the phasing out of animal testing that I've reflected on already. We aim to establish the UK as a world leader in developing and adopting alternatives to animal testing and align that with international standards. We'll say more about that at the end of this year. Our vision is for a world where the use of animals in research and development is eliminated. Enabling the properly regulated use of animals while we move away from animal testing is essential to improving the health and lives of humans and indeed animals. Nobody in our country of animal lovers wants to see us suffering, and we've got many animal lovers here, including myself. Our plan will support work to end animal testing and roll out alternatives as soon as it is safe and effective to do so. This is a roadmap which will ensure government, businesses and animal welfare groups can work together to find those alternatives to animal testing faster and more effectively. And there's 26 actions in that particular report. I'll not run through them all just now, you'll be pleased to hear, Mr Stewart, but many honourable members in here will know the report itself and should go through them. The member for Yeovil, I'm happy to give way, yes.
Adrian Ramsey.
I thank the Minister for giving way and for setting out the progress that the Government is making. But does he recognise that from what I've seen of the Animals in Science strategy, that there are targets in there that focus on reducing or eliminating experiments on certain types of animals? And does he agree that we actually need to be ending experiments on all animals, as has been expressed by members from all sides of the House today? And will he therefore engage with the campaigners arguing for Herby's law, who have put in place a suggested more ambitious strategy that seeks to do exactly that?
Minister.
Mr Chair, we don't disagree with the principle of Herby's law, and indeed that's what the strategy is trying to achieve. For the challenge for government, of course, is to balance that between what's achievable and what's validatable, not just in the UK but across the international community. And we want to be world leaders in this country for eliminating animal research, and that's what's been pretty clear on the front page of the strategy that we wish to take those 26 actions on. Let me run through some of that will continue to unpack and answer his question, because the Minister for Yeovil challenged us to say what is the strategy delivered so far. Well, the strategy has moved from commitment to trying to deliver that now, and with the actions underway across discovery, research, validation, regulatory decision-making, governance and indeed money to support some of that. Delivery is being supported through coordinated action across OLS, the NC3Rs, UKRI bodies and regulators. The MCR has launched that £20 million fund. Innovate UK and NC3Rs continue to work in partnership to advance the development. And in March 2026, the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency published new guidance setting out applications for medicines that use non-animal methods will be assessed and will be fast-tracked. So there is a lot of the strategy has already been put in place, but it can't just be a strategy that's in words, it's got to be in action as well, Mr Stewart. Let me just run through some of the challenges and questions that have been raised by honourable members, and I thought it's been a tremendously good debate in examining these issues. Can I just start with the mover of the motion from North Ayrshire and Arran, because she chairs the APPG. And the APPG, in terms of its aims, is to build cross-party support for replacing animal experiments in medical research with human-specific methods, working closely with the scientific community to identify opportunities, barriers and put forward constructive recommendations to government. This is almost the same aims as what the strategy is trying to achieve in terms of getting us to that from a governmental perspective. So we're aligned in terms of what the outcome that we want to achieve in terms of the APPG, and look forward to continue to work with her and APPG members to get that delivered. Just for clarity, because she did pose this with some of her interventions, and we've heard this from many honourable members, because there has been a little bit of confusion, not in this debate, but in previous debates. Testing on cosmetics was banned in 1998. Testing on household products were banned in 2015. Progress has been slower than we wish it to be, but we hope the new strategy will speed that up and give certainty to industry. She also mentioned, the member for Huntingdon and the member taking interventions mentioned Botox. Botox is not a cosmetic, so it's not covered by existing regulations on cosmetics, as he mentioned. But in the strategy, we've set the aim to apply only validated alternative methods to test for the potency of Botox by the end of 2027. And the MHRA now accepts an alternative for most common strengths of Botox. So hopefully now we'll see that being phased out within the next 18 months or so, given it's end of 2027. The member for Huntingdon gave us a whole list of questions. Some of them are the responsibility of the Home Office, so if I don't cover them all, we will make sure that he gets a detailed analysis from the Home Office. We will provide an update later this year in terms of the international perspectives, because we're working out at this moment and scoping out what the international perspectives look like. He asked about the funding out of the 75 million, 20 million for the transitional hub, 30 million for the UK Centre for Validation of Alternative Methods. It does not cover NC3R's funding. We're discussing KPIs tomorrow at an official level, at that official meeting. He challenged us on what the meeting will do tomorrow. That will then go to a ministerial meeting which meets every quarter, and the next one is due to meet on July the 8th of this year. He talked about the issue of the criminalisation. I'll get the Home Office to detail a response to him in writing, but that doesn't, the law criminalises interfering or planning to interfere with key national infrastructure. It doesn't cover the situation he talks about in terms of emails, and we'll get the Home Office to directly deal with that with him. The member, my honourable friend from Bristol East, has asked if there's any consideration given to the reviewing and reworking of licences and the revoking of licences. Again, that's a Home Office responsibility. I'll get a full response from them in terms of how they monitor licences. And she does challenge us on the use of AI, and I think we need to look at that. I mean, there's many advances in medical research that are happening with AI enhancement at the moment, MND being one that I know from my own constituency in terms of the way in which the brain operates. So AI and advances in technology will be a very key part of how we phase out the use of animal testing. The member for Taunton and Wellingborough asks if the regulatory body is should be paid for by industry. The regulatory body isn't paid for by industry. It's the industry charges, or sorry, the regulatory body charges for its licensing. So it's not paid for directly. This does not amount to the industry funding the regulator, and is standard practice for people to buy the regulatory services that is indeed required. My honourable friend, the member for the City of Durham, her challenge was to say more than warm words. That's what I think the strategy is about, and why we're advancing it rather quickly, and the terms are in there in terms of the dates for which we need to achieve many of the issues. Can I thank the member for Waveney Valley for his comments? I mean, I really do appreciate the fact that he welcomes this strategy. I know he wants us to go quicker and faster with more pace, as many have said. He's raised the issue about Herby's law at 2035, but we do have to make sure that there are replacements in place for this to happen in an orderly fashion. My honourable friend from Doncaster East asks for a fourth R in terms of replace, and that's what investment in the strategy is all about, and why the money is there to be able to do that. And the member for Didcot and Wantage talks to his cats. Interesting. Talks to his cat. I don't know if he ever gets a response to his cats, but he does want more pace. I hope he's not opening up a debate in Westminster Hall about whether you're a dog person or a cat person, because that would send us down, for want of extending the pun even further, that would send us down a rabbit hole that perhaps we don't want to go down. My honourable friend from Paisley in Renfrewshire said, is a cat lover. I believe she's got a cat called Clement Catley. And one called Chairman Meow, is that right? Mo Mulum, in terms of her cats. I don't know who's got the cat then called Chairman Meow. There must be somebody else that's got that. She's right to mention the Competition and Markets Authority investigation into vet costs. And this manifesto commitment is something we want to achieve. I mean, it's a very clear part of our manifesto, and we all want to see the same outcomes from that. I've mentioned the member for Yeovil already. He mentioned AI as well. He asks us about the action so far, which I've run through. My honourable friend from Newport and Isloyne, we agree with the principle again of Herby's law, because we want to get to that stage. What we can't do is to put in arbitrary timelines for things that we may not be able to achieve, but there are some very strong ones in there already, the 35% reduction by 2030. If we can go faster and further, of course we will do so. It will all depend on whether or not we can get that validated scientific research in place. I'll come back to her on the challenge she gives of whether or not we do have those 22 inspectors in place. In fact, I'm going to see if anybody's going to nod. No, we'll write to the Honourable Lady with those finer details. Let me just go into the Herby's law and why we wouldn't put Herby's law on a strategy footing. In line with all the international practice that we have, we're using the three baskets approach to this, to group animal tests and structuring, and how we prioritise the replacements. Of course, this is mainly about dogs, as we've heard today, but basket one is areas where there's a mature replacement tech. For example, the strategy aims for the end of 2026 to use only alternative methods for skin irritation testing, so that's this year, by the end of this year. Basket two is areas that have medium-term replacements, so the replacement for use of fish for acute toxicity tests for chemicals regulated by REACH by the end of 2028. So you can see that the strategy here does have defined endpoints where we can define them. And basket three is complex endpoints and long-term aims. So by the end of 2035, we'll include alternative methods and regulations for endocrine disruption tests. Well, I don't know what that means, but maybe one of the vets in here can tell us. They're not in the statutory freedom, but government commitments. And of course, these are gateways we want to go through with the three baskets that we are there. Let me just quickly finish off with the... I'm happy to give way.
Thanks for giving way. I just wondered, obviously, that I understand that the timetable that he's outlining, which is great, but there are still millions of tests that are being undertaken every year, unnecessarily, because we know about them. We know about the the force swim and the land 50. And I just wonder if you could perhaps outline a little bit more about the review of the generic project licenses, because again, how can you issue a license for a generic project when we don't know how can you evaluate and assess the risks there?
Minister.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of those individual projects, we will come back to the Honourable Lady and write to her with the details on those. The regulations are obviously run by the Home Office in terms of those regulatory levels. So let me come back with those three specifics that she asked. I will write to her and make sure everyone in the room has a copy of that. Let me just finish off with the two other members who spoke. The member for North East Hertfordshire, he's right. He said the scale of the suffering should overwhelmingly outweigh the suffering that it's trying to alleviate. And I think we would all agree with that. And that's exactly the proportionate nature in which we need to look at this, this issue. There has been huge pharmaceutical and medical progress being made on the back of animal testing. That is undeniable. The COVID vaccine, for example, being a big one for that in terms of alleviating the overwhelming suffering, alleviating that suffering. But he is right to challenge us on that moral issue, and which is why the strategy is in place. And my honourable friend from Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard, replacing animals is the right thing to do. We agree with that. The public want to see action. We also agree with that, which is why we are taking that action. And the strategy should seed that innovation. So the strategy isn't just about the government saying this is what we want to try and achieve, but hopefully the industry and innovation will see that through. And of course we've seen that with other advances that have been made in the cosmetic banning that she talked about. So hopefully that will seed industry to be able to move forward and trying to find those innovative ways through, of course, backed by the government strategy. The Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Mr Stewart, he listed the advances in life science innovation, and that is tremendous progress, but we need to go further and faster to move away from animal testing, and he gives that challenge, and I think we agreed with him. He did raise something incredibly important, I think, that we do have a very, and I'll come on to this in my closing remarks, we do have a very strict animal testing regulated environment in this country, one of the strictest in the world, and rightly so. There is a danger that if we were to just cut that off now, he rightly points out and challenges us that would mean that would go overseas. And I think if it did go overseas, we would see a whole raft of additional animal suffering that doesn't have the same standards. Now, that's not to diminish the issue, but that's just to say that whilst we have it in this country and whilst we regulate it to those standards, we should be making sure that those standards are met, notwithstanding all the issues that have been raised by individual members this afternoon. But there is a real danger that if we were to cut that off now without alternatives in place, that it would go overseas. And I know the Shadow Minister has raised that as well. In terms of the dual licensing, we'll have to come back to you on that in terms of the use for veterinary use. But there is an issue here in terms of the way in which animal testing does work, in terms of the licensing arrangements that he sets out. But actually, animal testing is also used for the veterinary side of medicines and advancements in technologies as well. So we have to be cognizant of that. Can I just appreciate the tone of which the Shadow Minister spoke in his response? There has been a lot done in this area. I think everyone has mentioned the word pace, and that's what we want to do. But I do appreciate the previous government did do a number of things in this area. Is the 35% reduction by 2030 achievable? We think it is. Many would say it's not achievable, it's not ambitious enough. Some would say it's too ambitious, but it is something we want to achieve, and that's why the strategy is in place, and actually why the money is part of the strategy is a key thing in the strategy in itself. So Mr Stewart, let me just quickly finish with the issue of while we still use animals in science. It requires to be continually adhere to the highest possible standards of animal welfare. This is reflected in the UK's world-leading robust regulation of the use of animals in science through the Animal Scientific Procedures Act, known as ASPA. This Act specifies that animals can only be used in science for specific limited purposes where there are no alternatives, where the number of animals used in the minimum needed to achieve the scientific benefit, and where the potential harm to animals is limited to the absolute minimum, known as the 3 Rs that we've discussed: replacement, reduction and refinement. Dogs are specifically protected species under ASPA. Projects must justify why animals are needed, why dogs are needed specifically, and why the numbers and procedures are necessary, and they are only authorised where the justification is robust. The petition rightly mentions situations about the conditions in which dogs are kept, and I want to address these claims, not to dismiss them, but to show that the regulatory system in the UK does work. The UK has some of the most stringent regulations in the world governing how animals are bred, housed and cared for, with legally enforceable standards, regular inspections, announced and unannounced, and a clear requirement to minimise pain, suffering and distress. The use of animals in science is very highly regulated. All establishments are required to have dedicated individuals, including veterinary surgeons, with legal responsibilities for the care and welfare of these animals, and an ethical review body which reviews any proposals for the use of animals and promotes the 3 Rs of animal use. And yet the reality is that the technology is not yet advanced enough for alternative methods to completely replace the use of animals. For now, animal testing and research plays an important role in supporting the development of new medicines and cutting-edge medical technologies for humans and indeed the animals themselves. For example, the development of the COVID-19 vaccine. I just want to address the issue that many members have mentioned around the failure rates here, because animals are used to assess how potential new medicines affect biological systems, ensuring drugs are safe and effective before human trials. The petition points out that 90% of drugs that appear safe and effective in animals do not go on to receive FDA approval. However, to say that 92% of drugs fail in human trials despite being tested on animals is to ignore all those candidate drugs that are tested on animals and found not to be suitable to progress to human trials. That is the issue we're trying to resolve here. Animal studies are only one part of a layered system that screens out unsafe or ineffective substances before they ever reach volunteers and patients. So animal testing is required by all global medicine regulators, including the MHRA, and this is another international issue that we have to resolve. Although the MHRA does not require all medicines to be tested on 2 species, safety testing in a second species is required for most drugs, with dogs being one of the species that can be used. And the key proposal in the petition calls for the end of testing on dogs and other animals for the development of products for human use. None of us want dogs to be used in research, despite how carefully animal welfare is regulated in this country. However, an immediate prohibition would undermine the UK's ability to test and regulate new medicines and vaccines for humans and indeed the animals themselves. We would be unable to meet our international regulatory requirements for drug safety testing, preventing virtually all first-in-human trials in the UK from happening, comprising our capacity to respond rapidly to future health threats, and resulting in slower access to new treatments for UK patients, and indeed slowing the innovation to remove animal testing altogether. And that's the key challenge that we're having to seek to achieve with the strategy. In conclusion, Mr. Stewart, we want a future where animals are used only in the very, very exceptional circumstances, and we're acting as fast as we can to get there through the replacement animals in science strategy and its delivery. We will keep driving the shift to validated alternative methods wherever possible, while maintaining the robust protections that keep people, animals and the environment safe in the meantime. I'd like to conclude by thanking members once again for their insightful contribution to today's debate. I'm sure we'll have many more in the future, and I look forward to working together as this issue progresses. Thank you.
Irene Campbell to wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I thank the Minister for his response, although I'm sure he isn't surprised that I disagree with quite a bit of his response. I hope the responsible Minister will consider implementing at pace, and I'm using that word again as many people have used today, the replacement methods we have heard so much about today. And I actually really urge the responsible Minister to rescind the forced swim test licences immediately and to prioritise a review of the whole licensing system, because there really is problems with this whole system. As well as introducing a review of the licensing system, we must have more robust enforcement of what is going on in laboratories. I accept that you have been. I accept that there has been statements made that there is enforcement, that animals are being looked after in the way they should be. But I think we've had examples today, raised today, where that often isn't the case, and there is so much self-reporting, which begs the question, what isn't reported when people are reporting on a self-supporting basis. This petition addresses an issue which I care deeply about, and it's clear from today's attendance and excellent speeches that this is a very important issue to many, and it is a privilege to be able to present debates like this in Parliament. The United Kingdom is often referred to as a nation of animal lovers, and petitions like this show how deeply the public care about animal welfare and the treatment of animals in laboratories. I would like to thank Jared Bailey and Maria Iriart for meeting with me on behalf of Camp Beagle, who launched this petition, and the many individuals, charities and organisations I work with in relation to this issue, and I'll name a few: Animal Aid, Animal Free Research UK, Cruelty Free International, PETA, Lush, Labour Animal Welfare Society and the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation. Everyone is working so hard to end animal testing. As ever, I would like to thank the Petitions Committee staff for all their help in organising this debate and meetings. And I'm going to end this debate in the words of Camp Beagle: animal testing is outdated, unreliable and cruel.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 736578 relating to animal testing. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. And on the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Order, order.